So please join me in welcoming the phenomenal group of alumni that we have here today. And I'll start with a very challenging question for each of you. Could you please just describe your organization a little bit and your role within the organization?
Do you want us to just go down the line?
Sure, yeah, we'll start that way. And I'll come join you guys.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me if I'm sitting back a little bit? Okay. Thank you all for being here first, especially seeing as it's very nice outside. Hopefully you've gotten time to enjoy that today and get to do that later. So my organization is a nonprofit called the Chesapeake Stormwater Network, and what we do primarily is help all 6 states that fall into the Chesapeake Bay watershed, which is the one we're in right now too, figure out how to manage their stormwater. Basically, when it rains, all that water has to go somewhere, and if it's falling on hard surfaces, it's going to pick up pollutants like from cars and oil and things like that, and we don't want it to end up in the Chesapeake Bay. So the work that my organization does kind of falls into 2 buckets. One is sort of like top down, where we help facilitate conversations with engineers, government employees, even nonprofits, to help make recommendations around how to manage those pollutants from the stormwater. And that actually ends up in policy recommendations. And then the other bucket that we do is in the education and training, so sort of the bottom up. Then we go with those recommendations and with those new standards and policies to the cities, to the engineers, and the practitioners, and help them actually figure out how to implement those practices on the ground through doing different educations and trainings. So those are the sort of 2 buckets, and what I do day to day falls more on the education and training side, although my role is actually sort of transitioning into getting to do both pretty soon, where I'm going to be working with education and training as well as with some of those policy recommendations, so I'm pretty excited about that.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Cardone. I was wondering if I could just have a show of hands of if you're in undergrad. Okay, and then grad students? Okay, just thank you. That's helpful. So I'm with RTI International, and RTI is a nonprofit research institute, and we're dedicated to improving the human condition. We're a large research institute. We've got about 6,000 employees around the world in about 90 countries. Our headquarters is in the Raleigh-Durham area of North Carolina, but we have a lot of employees that work remote, which is what I do, although I do go into our DC office on occasion. We do so many different types of projects at RTI, it's hard to kind of put the organization in a nutshell, but it's very science-focused and evidence-based. We do a lot of government contracting, so a lot of our revenue comes from government agencies like HHS, USAID, DOJ, Department of Education, those types of agencies. I just started in RTI in April. I am in an early career survey methodology position. I get to work on large and small-scale survey instruments, mostly on the front end, developing specifications for web developers so that they know the skip logic in the surveys. I do questionnaire assessment and editing to make sure that the questions and the response options follow survey research best practices. One of the things that I really enjoy right now is doing cognitive testing. So we do cognitive interviews with folks to test new or edited questions on research instruments. For example, I've done some interviewing with folks around questions to census instruments around sexual orientation and gender identity questions that they're looking to potentially add. Also some focus groups and recruiting work.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and for having us here. I'm really excited about this. As said, my name is Amy Soukup. I work at a nonprofit in Baltimore City called Live Baltimore. It has been around for about 25 years, but it's a very small nonprofit. There are currently 9 employees there. And Live Baltimore's mission is to attract and retain more city residents, primarily through home ownership. So we offer a lot of different resources and a lot of different programs, and it's divided between supporting potential or current homeowners and also supporting the real estate industry. So we provide educational programs for potential homeowners. We also kind of market the city incentive programs. Baltimore City has a lot of down payment assistance programs for different home buyers. And we don't manage those incentives, we kind of manage educating people on them. So we have a lot of workshops and virtual trainings on the incentive programs and the process of home ownership. And then we also work with the real estate professionals in the area. On one hand, we work with them to show them all the benefits of being a realtor in the city. A lot of people in the area prefer to take clients to the county and show them houses there. And we like to educate them on how great of a market Baltimore City can be and all the options here for their customers. And then we also try to kind of vet them a little bit. So we have our recommended partners of lenders and real estate agents and things like that we can then match with clients who are interested in finding someone that has been vetted by someone else. So we do that. We also do a lot of civic pride events. Our main one is Birthday Bash, which happens every July. This past year, it was in Inner Harbor, and we had over 1,000 people attend. And we do smaller events throughout the city to really stir up city pride and encourage people to love city living. Another smaller program that we have is our Way to Stay, or Family with Children's program, where we help families who have children who want to stay in the city navigate the school system, as that is one of the biggest reasons why households leave the city. It is because of having children and being unsure of the options in the city. I'm the data analyst there. My job is new to when I started 2 years ago. There had never been a data analyst there, so we're still working to slowly kind of expand the position a bit. I do a lot of work with the real estate market here in Baltimore City. I do a lot of reports and analysis on the strengths and weaknesses and share that with our partner and with the city. And then I also do a lot of our internal data metrics and tracking and things like that.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Manisha Vepa. Thank you for having me, and thank you guys for being here. I'm going to talk a little bit about my last role. I just started my new role at the Chamber of Commerce yesterday. So I know. Thank you. So I'll tell you what I know about the role, but if you ask me in 6 months, it'll probably be different. But I'll talk a little bit about my last role. I used to work at the Department of Commerce. I was a contractor for a company, and I worked in the department in the International Trade Administration that was focused on foreign business investment inwards to the United States. So what that meant is any company, international company, think Tata, Hyundai, Honda, if they were interested in moving to the United States and setting up a manufacturing facility or a company or some sort of subsidiary, we were the government arm that could help them with their site selection process, so figuring out where to go in the United States, and also just navigating the federal regulatory environment and figuring out what their options were or what the process would be. We were kind of a launching pad. And my role specifically in that organization was a researcher. So I would work with the companies and figure out their criteria for what they needed to come into the United States. So some companies really were worried about taxes. Some companies were worried about occupations and how much they would have to pay their employees. Some were worried about the cost of land and renting industrial land specifically. Others had very niche requirements. They wanted to know the weather, for example. So we would compile these customized research reports for them to help them figure out what states could be good, viable landing options for them. And we would never recommend a state. We were the federal government. But we would always let them know, here's some objective analysis for you. In my current role, I'm doing a little bit of the opposite. I'm helping companies from the US who have business stakes in Korea and Pakistan. We do a little bit more of reactionary work and try and get them, we're more of a matchmaker between the government and these companies. So we try and help them with anything that they're concerned about and they're interested in, help them get into the door and get those concerns heard. So one of the main things we do is we prepare submissions when there's new regulations coming out of the government. We try and make a paper or write a paper gathering all of our members' input to see what they're concerned about, what kinds of solutions they would like the government to focus on, and what kinds of things they would like to see, so that we can try and push the government into getting those into the regulations and helping our members out.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing kind of your experiences and a little bit more about your organizations. I think one of the things that's exciting about this panel is seeing how each of you are using research across the sectors, right? Whether we're talking about government or nonprofit or private sector business. Could you talk a little bit about your experience here at UMBC, and in particular, the research skills that you developed that you think have been most helpful in terms of your own work, and if there's any particular projects that you focused on that actually set you up well for success with where you're at now? And this time we'll go reverse order. Does that sound good? So we won't put you on the spot, Michele, to start. So.
Fantastic. Yeah, let me talk a little bit about my research experience here at UMBC. So I was a Sondheim Scholar, and I did research through the Honors College as well. So I took the political science research methodology course. I did econometrics, so did research projects through that. And then I did have an undergraduate thesis. I think it was a thesis. It's been many years. But it was more qualitative in focus, which is really interesting because my work now is much more quantitative. So the economics degree is really coming in handy here. I think the biggest couple skills that I took away were, one, how to vet data sources. One of the biggest things, especially working at my last job in the government, we had to make sure we knew where our data was coming from. We had to be able to defend it. And it had to be pretty neutral. Like, we had to know who was kind of publishing it, how they were making their calculations. So learning how to vet data sources, learning how to look into the source line of a visualization and track it down, being scrutinizing and being a little cautious with what we use, and then also best data practice. How do you combine data? How do you put it all together in a visualization? That was another big thing that I still continue to use today. Even in the qualitative aspect, just vetting, a lot of the work I do is looking at news updates and figuring out what's concerning in the regions that I focus on, and just knowing what sources are coming out, what their slant may be, why they're saying certain things, and kind of like, where does the middle line, where's the truth actually falling in between all of these sources that we're getting, especially foreign language media.
Yeah, so my master's was in economic policy analysis here at UMBC, and I took classes in the departments of policy, economics, and the GES department, so geography and environmental systems. Yeah. So I kind of had a wide range of trainings and education in this, because every department ends up approaching things differently. And then I would, be in a policy class and someone would be like, oh, well, you took econ classes, so you're going to think of it this way. And, oh, well, for the policy people, you're going to be interested in this thing. And it was mainly true. And I really enjoyed the fact that I was in the mix of a lot of different departments and a lot of different types of kind of experiences and types of training and focuses, because I could pull that all together. And I think that was one of the biggest things that still benefits me today, is being able to pull on all of these different sections. So I always say that you can find a way to use any experience you've had. Like, you might be thinking like, oh, I had this one random internship, or I had this one random job, and it doesn't relate to anything. Trust me, everything relates to everything. So having come from this program, having these 3 different kind of core groups of classes, I was not only able to use what I learned in one class with another class, or one assignment with another assignment, but I was then able to take all of that out into the world. And so being able to have somewhat of a cross training was really beneficial to me, especially because when I was an undergrad, I did not know what I wanted to do. And even in grad school, I was like, I don't really know where I see myself. I don't have a specific career or specific organization, but I did have all of these experiences, and that has been so beneficial to me. A few of the other things that has been really helpful still is learning how to talk about the topics of research with other people. So that has been so beneficial in school, and then in real life, is just talking to your professors, talking to your classmates, talking to other people about it, because in that process of talking, you are not only learning kind of what you're focused on, but you are also sharing it with someone else and then getting feedback in there. So that is like not a technical skill necessarily, but it's really beneficial being able to have those conversations, be inspired by other people, get that validation. And I think it really it does a lot for your research. And then I will just say one other thing is I really learned how to be very clear about my objectives going into research. So being able to start with what is my objective and nail that down before getting into the research so that I have a clear path, because I love going down rabbit holes. I love getting distracted. You give me a topic and I swear I could write 15 research papers about the specific topic. So having a very clear objective really helped me not get distracted by all the other objectives that I could pursue. So I had a Google Doc and I would just file everything else away to like, oh, in the future, I want to look more at this. But I was able to really stay on track with research because I knew what my objective was.
I really appreciate what you said about the kind of the peer review, or like the, because I feel like that was so helpful in especially some of my graduate classes, because I definitely use that in my work. For me, I would say it's funny because I was definitely focused on kind of quantitative methods when I was doing my master's, and I'm not doing a lot of quantitative analysis now, but I think that experience of learning coding and statistical software and just working with different big data sets is something that I use all the time, because I got exposure to different survey instruments and to how things, I'm using that kind of on the front end now, because I have the analysis piece in my mind as I'm working on the specifications for questions as they're going into instruments. So that training in statistical coding and in working with large data sets is an extremely helpful skill that I'm definitely using. Another one is qualitative interviewing. I was a little bit reluctant to take our qualitative methods class because I had in my mind that I was quantitative focused, and I ended up getting a lot out of it, and I'm definitely using those skills in my job.
Cool. I feel like I'm going to say the opposite, which is I'm a very qualitatively focused person. And so what was very helpful to me in grad school was taking advantage of the opportunities to learn how to do things quantitatively and how to read them. So I was really grateful for the opportunity to back up. I was public policy, but in the public policy department, you specialize in a type of policy, or you can. So I specialized in environmental policy, which in the case of my program meant I was taking also a lot of classes in GES, and sort of Frankensteined a program together, which I'm always really appreciative of, because it's very easy once you pick a program in school to get siloed and to end up really just talking to the people who are taking your classes and the professors who are teaching your classes. But the really beautiful and inspiring thing about being on a university campus is getting to talk to experts in the field of all different types of field. And so to like reiterate what Amy was saying of finding the connections everywhere, that is what is the best part about being on a university campus, is getting to find the connections in all of these different fields. I talk with my hands a lot, so I feel like they're like flying around. So for me, getting to do the sort of dual, taking classes in public policy and taking classes in GES, as well as taking classes that allowed me to better understand how to use the quantitative methods, were really, really valuable, but still coming at it with this like people-centric mindset, because the reality is a lot of employers, and especially if you're trying to get into the government, they say like, if you can't measure it, does it even count? So you have to be able to figure out, even with those people-focused qualitative measurements, how you're actually going to standardize them into metrics, even though like if you're in the social sciences, it's not fun to do that. But the fact is, like, if you want to be able to get money for programs or measure your success, you have to be able to figure out how to do those measurements. So that was something I found really valuable. And also just taking classes that allowed me to develop maybe hard skills or programmatic skills that cost a lot of money if you wait till further down the line, like taking GIS classes as much as possible, using how to do learning how to do coding using R, Python, or whatever it is, taking those statistics classes, because they are languages and you do have to keep them up, but even if you sort of fall off, and don't know how to do them day to day after school, after you're done taking those classes, just knowing the background and the context really feeds into a lot of the social science or data analysis work in the jobs that you might be applying to after school. So even if you kind of come out of a GIS class being like, I know how to make a map, but that's about it, it still is so helpful and still so translates. So taking advantage of those classes while you're here is a very high recommendation I have.
Great, thank you all. I think this is really wonderful advice, and I appreciate all of you sharing your experiences. I'll ask this one, and sort of admittedly, you know, I'm a political scientist by training. When I studied political science as an undergraduate, I didn't have to take any math or statistics or computing, and now as an academic, most of what I do in my research is math and computing. If you had to go back, right, and change one thing, you know, about your sort of experience in college and, you know, maybe professionally, maybe personally, what would you do and why, and how might that help you in, you know, the sort of longer run? And we'll just let whoever wants to go first on this one. We don't have to go any particular order.
I'd take that GIS course. I'm going to echo like the skills building aspect of it. I did learn data, which was a big help in my current job. I will admit I didn't use it after 2018 and brushed it off, and I did have to Google a lot of stuff. But once it's like riding a bike, and so that was nice. But I did wish I could use GIS for some of the projects at my last job that were very, very cool, but I didn't have the right training for, and someone else did. So that is one thing I would change. The other thing is kind of being more risk-taking with some of the opportunities. I did a lot of traditional internships. I worked for the Maryland Housing Department. I did and some other research type things on campus, but kind of thinking outside the box. Like one of the things I always wish I did was start a YouTube channel and do like a news type of segment where I just like looked at news. I feel like maybe it would never have become, you know, influencer level status, but it would have been a way for me to flex skills or to get into that habit of engaging with material, and been something I could have put on a resume and had a little bit more backing even before I started working. So I think being a little bit more untraditional with the paths that I went down is what I wish I had done more of at UMBC.
I don't think it's too late for you to become an influencer.
That's true. I can still do it. I can still do it.
I'd watch your YouTube videos.
Oh, thank you.
I will say two things. First of all, I second take the GIS class, even though I did take the GIS class because my supervisor was like, hey, we've talked about your interests. You should, like, I was a GES person. You should take GIS. And I did. And it kind of led to me getting the job that I have now, but I'm still even, you know, back taking classes again to learn more. So it doesn't have to specifically be GIS, even though I really think there's a lot of really cool opportunities. And I think GIS is becoming more, not necessarily more commonplace, but more of something that employers are looking for, or it's a bonus for them to see like, oh, you could make a map for us. That's really cool. So that is one, but any technical skill, you know, whether it's, you know, R or Python, some coding, whether it's you're really good at Excel, whether you're in, you know, GIS stuff, having at least one thing that you are pretty solid on is a really great thing to have under your belt. The non-technical advice is going back to talking with people. And Amanda said it so well that you're on a college campus. There are so many people here to talk to. And especially in undergrad, like, I am an introvert by nature. I do not enjoy networking. It was the worst word. It's the worst word I've ever heard in my entire life, I think. I'm like, oh, goodness, please no. But find a way where it works for you. Find a way to talk to people. Find a way to make a connection at least, and then, you know, grow it out. But that would be some of the really big advice I have, because that is how I've gotten to where I am now. Is the few connections that I was able to develop has really led me forward. So the more connections you can have with people, the larger your opportunities are going to be in everything.
Do you want me to go, Amanda, or would you?
Yeah, I'm a little, go ahead.
Of course, I say that, and then my train of thought, of course, completely goes. So to keep going a little, I think, with what, okay, I remember what it was. So I'll do technical and non-technical as well, but technical, obviously second and thirding everything that Amy and Manisha has said. Also like graphic design. You don't have to be amazing at graphic design, but I remember like taking myself back to undergrad versus grad school. Canva wasn't a thing in undergrad yet. So what people were usually doing graphic design, if it looked good, it was done on InDesign. And I didn't take an InDesign class until I was a senior, and I was so mad that this was the first time I was learning to use InDesign, because I was like, I could have used that the whole time. You don't need to use InDesign really anymore unless you want to, because Canva is a lot more user-friendly. So I'm sure many of you are probably already pros at Canva, but just understanding kind of good design at the most basic level, even if you don't end up using it day to day, super helpful. It's just something very good that you can put on a resume. Learning how to present your data and present your information, whether on a poster or on a PowerPoint in a aesthetically pleasing way, is huge. If it doesn't look nice, people outside of the people in your field are probably not going to engage with it very much. So that's why it's so valuable. And then on the non-technical side of things, reiterating everything Amy said as far as like just talking to people as much as you can, doing what you're doing already and going to events while you have them is huge. And also I would recommend, and something that I did a little bit, but even would do more, is every elective that you can take, try to take outside of your field if you can. Just reiterating that it's so easy to fall into your silo of your field, but pushing yourself outside of your program, because you will start to see all of those connections, and we'll get to see how different people are thinking about things differently, and that'll just feed back into your own work, and that's really valuable.
All right. Well, I think this is some excellent advice, and you know, as you think about sort of your kind of research experiences and how they have set you up well for your position at your current organization or other organizations, are there any pieces of advice you could give to students who might be engaged in research projects that would help them position themselves for either going, you know, further into academia or starting out in that first profession? Any sort of advice you might have in you know, helping them kind of navigate those processes?
I know that UMBC has like some like a poster presentation sessions, and you know, faculty are often really willing to work with even undergraduate research assistants on projects. I would say, at least for my organization, they really value when people have either published or tried to get published, presented at conferences, even when they're really small scale. So when you can look for opportunities for your work to be in kind of the public sphere, just absolutely take advantage of those. And I would also say, kind of along those lines, don't get too married to your really narrow topic. So if you do have mentors, and you know, along those lines of kind of networking that everyone's talking about, faculty here are doing really interesting work, and I think that that was something that was helpful for me coming in, was not being interested in kind of methods in general, and you know, just being open to working with different professors on what they were working on. And so I ended up getting something published as a second author with a faculty member on a topic that I might not have chosen myself, but it was a really interesting project to work on, and I really enjoyed it. So I think that you know, kind of being open to both working on your own research projects, but also supporting other like faculty members' research projects as well, I think can really set you up for success in the career market.
I think so my bit of advice is, I mean, I keep giving advice because I'm a yapper, but do research, let your passion show through. Be passionate about what you're doing. You know, find, even if it's not something you would have thought about doing, but you're interested in any part of it, being passionate about something, I feel like isn't always talked about in an academic setting because, we're supposed to be analytical, we're supposed to be objective, we're supposed to be very like, anyone else could come to the same conclusion that I come to, but it shows through when you are passionate about it. And the passion, I think, is what will be communicated to future employers or future graduate programs or future opportunities, is when you can say, oh yeah, I did this is on my resume, but let me tell you more about it. Let me show you how excited I am about it. And skills can be learned. You can learn so many things, but that passion is an extra thing that is sometimes missing from people. So being able to have passion for what you're researching and then talk about it, I think is something that isn't always advised with that, you have to be analytical and stuff. But I think there are ways to show your interest, show your passion about it. And I think, again, that really shines through to people that you're either trying to get a job from or grad program or whatever it may be.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think it's very important to find, to hone your elevator pitch for whatever you're working on, both for a professional setting, an academic setting, and also work on it for a setting in which you're talking to people who are not academic, who will have no idea what you're talking about, because that's a huge issue, is this sort of gap between academia and, for lack of a better term, like the real world. And so that's like a gap that we're constantly working to bridge, and just being able to talk about what you're doing using the beginner's mindset, or using sort of like knowing what you will need to explain, is very valuable. So that was a takeaway from Amy. I need a little notebook for for my other points. But yeah, I'll end it there since I can't think of it.
I'm just going to add, any research is good research, including failed research. So I think, like, tagging onto this elevator pitch, it's not really about, at least in my opinion, as someone who hasn't gone into academia per se, but has gone on to more professional level research, it's not really about the end product per se. It's about how you can talk about it and how you can talk about the process. There's a couple projects that come to mind. One I'll give you a short description of. I tried to do a study on the wage gap in Korea, but I was looking more at like education levels and whether there was like a university level wage gap. Needless to say, I couldn't find any data that was in English nor accessible for free, and I was on a college student budget, so I couldn't get data, so I couldn't do the analysis. So I had a really, really hard time with the research, and it ended up being super statistically insignificant, did not get any results that I could put in a paper, did not get anything that I could like tangibly hold on to, but I did talk about it relentlessly throughout my graduate school interviews. Because you can talk about process, you can talk about what you went through, what were the skills that you used, what was the literature review that you conducted, what did you learn from it, what did you take away. There's so much of the research that you still did, that you still engage with, so don't be afraid of whatever you did if you think it's not prestigious enough, or it didn't yield significant results, or didn't go anywhere. It's not a new question. Just talk about the process, think about what you really did, and boil it down there, and you'll have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, can I add real quick too? Like, nothing in research really, I think, can be considered a failure, because it is all about the process. You know, as long as you're following all your best practices and not plagiarizing, I guess, but doing the process. And then also to reiterate the mentorship, that was the other thing that I was glad that Amanda brought up, because taking advantage of the fact that you're a student and these professors are here doing research, but they're also very much so here for you. So finding a mentor, either as a professor, or if you're going into the data and starting to do your research, and especially if you hit a paywall, not being afraid to reach out to academics or people working in the field that you're interested in, and asking them if they would be willing to talk to you, even if it's not in a formal mentorship setting, just as a brief like Zoom call, or they will, if you hit a paywall, they will probably send you the paper for free, with no problem. But two, it's just another really good way and really sort of low pressure way to build an extra connection, which really helps when you go out and start looking for jobs too, because you just have this extra connection.
Great, thank you so much, and you've actually kind of set me up for the next
You're
question.
welcome.
Yeah, so thank you, Manisha and Michele, because research is challenging, right? I mean, certainly as an academic, I recognize the sort of struggle that you face in trying to translate data to make something meaningful out of it and communicate that to others. Could you talk about the challenges that you faced in, engaging in the research process within your careers, and any suggestions or what you did to sort of overcome it?
I have a lot of data challenges in my field. So I work on Korea issues, but specifically I used to work a lot on regimes in Asia that were not very open. So we were looking for data that either didn't exist, wasn't collected, or wasn't available at all past a firewall. So I'm constantly, and this is, even in my last job, we had issues where we couldn't get access to the data, so that would have really given us the answers we wanted. So you have to get creative. And you have to trust in your process. I think is the biggest advice I have is continue to actually let me back up. Going back to something that Amanda said earlier, don't be married to the one methodology that you're using. Don't get your sights set on this is the perfect way for me to do it. This is the method that I'm going to use. I've got it all planned out. You will encounter snags. You will hit a wall somewhere. And so just being okay, let me back up 4 steps and figure out maybe I pare down my question. Maybe I take a different route. Maybe I see if there's another data source that I can fashion into this. Maybe I just go qualitative instead of quantitative. What else can I do? And I think taking that time to be adaptable is a very key part of the research process. It won't ever go the way that you want it to.
So the data that I work with at my job, kind of 2 types of data, one of it being the internal data from the organization. It is what we report on to the city, and so my nonprofit is a quasi-city agency, so we are not part of Baltimore City, but we do get majority of our funding from them, so we report to them through the budget process like any other city agency would. So we have all of our internal measures of how many people attended the events, how many unique people attended the events. In an event, we have our trolley tours, so that's who went to what workshops, who went to this, who did that. Collecting that is so hard. There are so many moving pieces, and when I showed up, my organization was struggling to track these things. Like I said, this was, a position that didn't exist before, and when I showed up, they'd be like, oh yeah, we're, doing surveys about this, and we take down the numbers of this, and then I'd be like, why? What do we use this for? We eliminated 3 types of surveys that they were administering every year and never once used the results. And I was like, that's so there's challenges in that because it is, very internal, and I'm working with people who are so passionate about what they're doing and so passionate about city living, but they are not data people. So trying to sit down with them and say okay, what is the definition of this data point? How are you tracking it? Oh, all 4 of you have a different definition of this, so we need to get on the same page. So that's one challenge, is internally working with people to figure out what their data definition is and how they're collecting and reporting stuff. And then the other data that I work with is the real estate market data, which is also just absurd. But challenges with that, really, I feel in line with, there's really no such thing as failing with research. Having a little bit of data is better than having no data. And you are going to be so frustrated at times with the little bit of data that you have. So just take a beat and really get creative about other sorts of data and bring it back to that analytical objective. Bring it back to why you need the data, because if you can flip how you're asking questions, you might be able to find ways that you can access data that's not at all what you originally thought. So walk it back to the beginning, see, okay, this is my objective. Are there any other ways to answer that?
I can go if you want, or you can go. Go ahead.
Okay. So I think for me, using research skills like so RTI is kind of, we definitely have sort of an academic feel in our culture, but we do, like I mentioned, we do a lot of government contracting. And so while we're doing some internal research projects that we might, publish in a survey methods journal with, some of our clients, some of the surveys that we might do on behalf of clients, doing that kind of client-focused work means that we're not always in charge of the research questions that are being asked. We're not always in charge of whether a recommendation that might be evidence-based is accepted or not. So, we have really good relationships with our clients, but sometimes government clients might have different pressures on them for why things in a big federal survey instrument need to be a certain way. And so not always having, the ability to kind of control those processes. And obviously there's a ton of things in research that you can't control even when it is really just your own project, but being on kind of these really large projects in a really large organization when it's, another organization that's kind of leading the research questions, it definitely creates its challenges, but you kind of learn kind of what is in your purview and what's not, and try to definitely integrate best practices into the piece of the pie that you own, and try to make sure that things kind of operate as smoothly as possible.
And then for me, the challenges at my organization are sort of, challenges and opportunities, I guess, are sort of twofold. For the one that I'm involved with fairly regularly is a lot of survey development, and sort of similar to what Amy was talking about, like really thinking about when we're doing surveys, because it is a lot to ask. It might not seem like it from the back end, but like I get surveys in my inbox all the time that I ignore, right? So when someone's taking the time to do a survey for your organization, respecting that time really seriously, both as a human being, but as a researcher, even if your job title isn't researcher. So thinking about why you're asking the questions that you're asking and why you're measuring what you're measuring. It's sort of the flip side to like, if you don't measure it, it doesn't matter. In this case, it does matter, but do you really need to ask it for your purposes? And I think where I really learned that was in doing a thesis or capstone or whatever it was for my grad program. I also did a capstone project in undergrad at a different university. And I think a lot of programs often give an option of like taking particular courses or doing a capstone project. And I really recommend talking about the process like we have been. If you have the opportunity to do a capstone, even though it's a lot of work, it's really worth it for you to understand the process of how to go from a research question to developing your analysis and your methods to implementing it to coming up with the conclusion. It's like very useful to do. So that's sort of one side, is developing surveys and figuring out what to leave in and what to put in and how to analyze it. And then the second thing is anyone here in an environmental program? Oh, no. No, I'm just kidding. The reason I ask is a lot of climate data is developed in a very particular way that's not, it's not going to make you optimistic when you hear it, but it's developed on this principle called stationarity, which is assuming that the data that we're looking at is going to sort of stay steady or develop in predictable ways from when you start looking at it. So a lot of our climate projections are, one, quite outdated because it takes a long time to use these things. So a lot of our climate projections are actually coming from like 2006, which isn't great. We know a lot has changed since 2006. And it's also assuming that the patterns that were happening in 2006 are the same patterns we're seeing in 2024 and beyond, which obviously I think we can all probably agree that they're not. All that to say is those are usually the numbers that we're working with when thinking about how to manage stormwater and thinking about how climate is changing the amount that it rains. So that's a challenge in that we really have to think about the data that we're using, because even though it's the best data technically out there, there are ways that we can present those numbers which acknowledge the fact that this is limited and these are not, it's the best that we have, but it's not even necessarily reflective of what the scenarios are, because that really impacts the recommendations that we're making for policy and for design standards into our stormwater management system. So that's a big challenge that we have.
Can I just add one more thing? I think that there's a lot in research when you hit a challenge where you feel down on yourself in a way where you're like, oh, I can't figure this out, or oh, this piece of the puzzle that I really wanted to solve, I can't solve. But I think always remind yourself that there's a reason that the data doesn't exist properly is because people haven't been looking into it, or people haven't thought of it yet, or they haven't really taken the time to delve into it. And what you're doing is important, and even if you uncover only like the corner edge of the piece of the puzzle, you've uncovered more than that has already been covered before. So keep being confident in yourself and know that you're still doing good work, even if you're not getting very far in it.
Thank you, and I think that's some excellent advice. You know, sometimes, you know, even as a researcher, we hit various roadblocks or we find that something's not significant, and that can be meaningful research as well, right? I want to actually give others an opportunity to ask questions. I also just quickly wanted to make a plug for an event that we're going to host through the Center for Social Science Scholarship that'll happen in January, which is a data visualization 3-day workshop in R that's going to be open to the community, and both virtual as well as in person. So, you know, be on the lookout for that. You know, sign up for our events. You know, I'll open it up to the audience, and as I do that, if you guys are thinking about your questions, I'll just say if there's any piece of advice you want to, you know, leave with students in particular, feel free to do those. And then if you want to ask a question, just raise your hand. And the last thing I'll say is the food is here, so stick around after to get some food. All right, well, I see a couple hands. I saw this one first.
Ms. Perry, what kind of engineer do you dealing with or meeting with?
What kind of engineers am I meeting with? Mostly stormwater engineers. So people who are, what a stormwater practice is for instance, a rain garden or it can look like so many different things. Sometimes they're called green infrastructure, green stormwater practices. So you have quite a few on campus actually. They often look like gardens that if it's raining, they're going to fill up with some water, and then within a number of hours to maybe 1 or 2 days, that water filters down. And what you see on the surface is usually a bunch of plants surrounded by some sort of retention wall, even if it's, you know, just a curb. But what's underground is a bunch of engineered soil media and piping that is slowly, it's catching the rainwater, filtering it down, slowly releasing it so that those nutrients and pollutants are being absorbed by the plants. So all that to say, that's where the engineering comes in when it comes to stormwater, because of course there's a lot of engineering involved in our gray infrastructure, our pipes and our stormwater pipes. But then the other side of it is how to design these practices to retain water, filter nutrients, because it's not just going to be the plants, it's actually all of this stuff that you're not seeing underground. Does that answer your question? Yeah, mostly stormwater engineers, though sometimes we get some other infrastructure engineers involved as well.
Hello, I had a question for Amanda. So I plan on working in education with assessments in school psychology, and I wanted to ask you about your experience trying to modernize assessments for gender and sexuality diversity and the obstacles that you face in that field on a large scale and how you stay motivated to keep facing them. It's a deep question.
So this is definitely something that I'm definitely passionate about so I'm not so much involved in like assessment necessarily, but in terms of like measurement and just kind of demographic collection and just like where, you know, where are queer people and where, you know, like how are we talking about folks, and how can we ask questions, how can survey instruments be gathering this data in a way that's both inclusive but also in a way that is not, you know, so one of the things the census is looking at is, you know, a lot of their instruments rely on proxy reporting. So can you rely on another household member to report on the other household member's gender identity or sexual orientation for that matter, right? You could maybe rely on them to report the other household member's race. So that's, a research question that I think is very interesting. I think your question is, how do I stay motivated, or what is my,
Because they're really big obstacles that you face,
Sure.
and especially in education. I want to work with students who are queer and students who are facing those obstacles day to day, and that can be very overwhelming for them.
Mhm.
So I want to know how you keep at it, because it's a very big issue.
Sure. So I haven't been at it for long. It's one thing I haven't. So it's not something that I've burned out on yet. I would say I think that what motivates me is that it feels like a lot of people in positions of some authority and leadership are like motivated to make change around this. I hope that continues to stay that way. I think a lot of people want to get it right, and I like thinking that I'm part of a team, both a team of people that I know and a kind of a broader, kind of more global group of people that are kind of working to, make advancements in this kind of effort, because we know that it's important. So at this point, I have that feeling, is what I would say.
Thank you. I see another hand.
I have a pretty, does it work?
Should be. Good.
I have a really simple question. It's for Amy. As someone who also gets bogged down in rabbit holes and loses their train of thought very easily, how do you, it's one thing to keep a backlog of the interesting things you come across and the ideas that you have. How do you stay consistent in following up with yourself about going back and looking through that backlog of information and then going down those rabbit holes?
Yeah, that is a very good question, and one that I'm still working on. What I have found to work at least a little bit is I kind of have two rabbit hole, like I divide it into work-related things and then other stuff. And for my work-related things, I every week calendar in an hour or two that is just, I call it my fuck around and find out time. Just, I play around, it's following up on leads, it's reading articles, and thankfully my work is very supportive of that. We have a very loose work structure in that we are very much encouraged to pursue different things, but by putting it on my calendar, that this is the time that I get to kind of look more into that, then I'm not spending my entire workday doing it, but also I'm saying, no, this is a part of my job now. And I'm giving myself that time to really, spend on that. And I try to do the same with the personal interests. I have ended up kind of having one evening a week where I kind of look into those things and I start doing things and I make connections. It's hard because I feel like I am either one extreme or the other, where I don't look at anything, I don't go down any rabbit holes, I don't pursue outside interests, and I don't engage in the things that those little pop-ups of like, oh, that would be cool to look at, or I'm so focused on that I don't get my work done. So the best that I've come up with now is scheduling that time for myself that I have dedicated to it. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I noticed in the biography section that a number of you have done volunteer experiences or service like AmeriCorps or Boren Scholars. How would you say, would you recommend those experiences, and how would you say they prepared you? I know some people do it before grad school or just for your careers in general.
Do you want to go down the line of volunteer people? I did Peace Corps. I did Peace Corps. I did it, which if you're unfamiliar with Peace Corps, it's an American volunteer program, like you have to be an American citizen. It operates in many countries across the world, and those countries' governments have to invite Peace Corps to be there. So Peace Corps isn't there by the U.S. government's own accord. It does have to work very closely with that country's government. And that country's government also works to sort of set the goals of what those Peace Corps volunteers are doing there. Peace Corps volunteers are predominantly in their early 20s. That being said, so I went in my mid-20s, which is not that much later, but I really recommend, if you can, going a little bit later into your 20s. If you can, like, it's hard to, exit undergrad, enter in a career field, and then do Peace Corps. I had a weird career path in my 20s. I was doing seasonal outdoor education work, so it was easy for me to leave my career as it was and then do something else. But if you're able to get some experience, I think it is really valuable. That being said, like those in their early 20s who were there were amazing volunteers as well. Doing any kind of international or national, like AmeriCorps volunteer work is something I would really, really recommend. It's also, like, in its own way, a privilege to do so. AmeriCorps, I believe, and Peace Corps also has student loan deferment if it's something that you're interested in, which can be really valuable because that's part of that privilege, is being able to do something where you're not going to be making much money for a couple years. And if you have bills to pay or people to support, like, that can be really difficult. But getting to work internationally is huge if that's something you're interested in doing long term. But even if it's not, getting to travel and be a member of a community that's very different from your own, maybe learning an entirely new language, and maybe even working in a field that is different than the one you're interested in is so valuable, and you will come back very open-minded and very, Peace Corps loves to say the word resilient, because you do face a lot of challenges when you are living in a new country, in a new environment. International aid as its own concept has a lot of, like, interesting context to it, but if you have that opportunity to volunteer, if you can find a way to do it, it is something I think is so, so, so valuable, both on a personal and professional level.
Great. I think we have time for at least one more.
Could I just add on
There were a
that a
couple
little
more
bit?
volunteers.
Yeah, so I was,
You guys were taking-
no, sorry, I've been in both AmeriCorps and the Peace Corps. I did AmeriCorps right after getting my bachelor's, and then a couple years later I did the Peace Corps, and I would absolutely recommend anyone who thinks, like, oh, I might be interested in that, check it out. Talk to people, check it out. And I had also written down a note to say that even if your goals, if you are like, I want to get into academics, I want to be a professor, I am just going to be a researcher, I know the experiences that I need to get me there, kind of goes back to any experience can be beneficial. Mm-hmm. Even if you're like, I just want to spend the rest of my life in a classroom teaching people as a professor, other opportunities like AmeriCorps, the Peace Corps, can be so beneficial. There are a lot of those very tangible financial benefits too. I personally came to UMBC as a Shriver Peace Worker Fellow. So as a Peace Corps volunteer, when you come back, you are eligible for something called the Coverdale Fellowship. Over 100 universities and colleges in the U.S. offer it to different degrees. Some offer, you get $5,000 off tuition. Some are full ride. I ended up getting a full ride for my graduate program here at UMBC, and I was also a part of a cohort and a fellowship program that got me so many different connections. I met so many passionate people. These opportunities can be very, very difficult. The Peace Corps' old tagline, or current, was the toughest job you'll ever love, and I can say it was the best and worst experience of my life. But I would definitely encourage anyone to take those opportunities that people might not see them as a natural progression in a career, but they provide so many benefits. I could talk for hours about being in the Peace Corps and AmeriCorps because it was such impactful times in my life.
So I did Fulbright, which is not really the same type of program. I was on a grant, so it was a little bit different. But 100% recommend it. I think it was the best experience of my life. Granted, I've only been out of college for 6-7 years now, but so far still great. I think that I was working as a teacher, which I obviously don't do now, but I still learned a lot of skills, going back to what everybody said before. Learning how to explain things to people that don't understand you is a really, really important skill that I still use every single day. And I think it has made me a better speaker and more resilient and more adaptable, which means that you can do things like face research problems with a lot more calmness and grace and be a problem solver rather than a problem creator or a Debbie Downer at work, which I think is really, really important. So highly recommend, take a look, try your best, try finding something that you're interested in one of those programs.
Great, all sage advice here. So we'll take one more question, and then afterwards, hopefully we can stick around and we can ask the questions more informally.
Hello, thank you all for being here. My name is Emanuela. I'm a public health and sociology major. And I was wondering, I'm interested in research as well, but I also want to do like community engagement work. So I was wondering, like in your roles, do you get to interact with the communities that you're researching so that you're not, kind of just sitting on your computer all day researching? You can start.
So I personally don't get to, but a lot of people at RTI do. So like it's a large organization. So like I know that some of our researchers have done community-based participatory research and those types of methods. So we just have so many different types of projects, and we do research in other countries that are doing kind of like development research and interacting with communities. So I'll say that as a survey methodologist, I'm not working with community, but there are definitely roles at RTI where you can do that.
Yeah, I think it is the thing where there are so many opportunities to kind of have a position that does both. It does depend on the organization. It depends on the position. It depends on the project. Like I said, I'm the data analyst, but there's 9 of us. So when we put on events, I am right up in there with everyone else. I am, in the community. I am taking part and living alongside these people that I'm also pulling research and data about. So I really think that there are tons of opportunities like that. I think that's a good thing to know that you want. So when you are looking for an employer and looking for a job, you can, ask that in your interview. You can make sure that that is something that is available to you.
So my first job was with a nonprofit called Freedom House, and I worked on research for their index on democracy by country. And so I was really engaged with the community that we were researching, which was people from those countries, and measuring how the democratic situation had improved or declined over the year. So I was really face-to-face with a lot of things, and I think someone mentioned earlier about how to deal with those challenges and how you stay motivated, and it was quite difficult. I did end up burning out of that job and had to transition to something else. It was very deep, so I've had to reframe how I think about community engagement, and I'm in a different sort of role where the community engagement piece of my research is the client work that I do with the businesses, but at the same time finding that, what's the word that I'm looking for, oh my God, it's not coming to me. Finding that satisfaction of what it means to engage with them when you hear stories of what they took out of it, even if it's a small win, where they said, oh, in my last job, it'd be like, yes, we decided to invest based on your research. That was a good measure for me of community engagement, where I was like, I've done something, I've heard it from someone, I've been able to see them face-to-face and talk to them face-to-face and see how they've used my research. So I think keep an open mind about what community engagement looks like to you. It could be very small. It could be just you meet them at an event and they are interested in talking to you and hearing about what services you provide or past research you've done. It could be even bigger if you do something that really impacts their work.
I can speak really briefly. Kind of similar. Our definition of community is kind of interesting in my role, because we are Chesapeake Stormwater Network, but our network is made mostly of existing practitioners in the stormwater field, be they engineers, other nonprofits, or municipal government employees. But then most, if not all of those, because it's required by their stormwater permits, do direct community engagement. So we're sort of often one step removed from members of the communities where these these stormwater practices are actually being implemented and going in the ground, but we are helping develop training and sort of best practices for how these how this network can engage with the community. So it's sort of this interesting, I have an interesting disconnect where I'm very involved in community engagement and staying sort of up to date with like where are there good case studies of community engagement in stormwater, who's doing good work, you know, how can we highlight them without actually being involved in the actual community. So I find that very interesting, just sort of these sort of levels of community engagement. So just sort of reiterating, thinking about how you can reframe what community engagement might mean in a job that you are looking at.
Well, I love that we ended on a note of community engagement and using research to do that, because I think it's really important. And I really want to thank all of you for being here and taking your time to talk to us about research and your role. So please join me in thanking them. And again, the food is here, so please help yourself. Also, if you didn't sign up or sign in, please do so, and then we can share other programs and events much like this. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you all. Absolutely.
There's a little gift for each of you.